Hello, everyone. So we have a very interesting topic, and I'm sure with Nikhil and Vivan and Dhruv, it's going to get a little bit heated, that's expected. No, so yeah, but I think to set context, we will start with Abhishek, and I've asked Abhishek to sort of set the context on how do we look at ethical AI? How do you explain ethical AI to the general public?
Well, the word AI has become a buzzword in the last 3 years, and I think it all started with the Chat GPT, the true democratization of the technology that we all know as AI. Let's take an example. We all know about driverless cars, autonomous cars. Now think of a scenario when this car meets with an accident. So who will you hold accountable for that accident? Or take an example wherein this autonomous car reaches a situation where it has to decide whether it has to save the pedestrian or the driver on the road. So it's typically an ethical dilemma, and that's where this concept of, or the question of ethical AI has arisen. So it's basically a set of principles which governs how do you design and develop AI, keeping in mind the human ethics and behavior. So that's how I would put it in the context of ethical AI. And this is because of different reasons. For example, how do you train the data? Is the data biased? The example of the autonomous car, the user accountability. Who is accountable for the outcomes of using the technology of the AI? So I think that's how I would see the ethical AI.
So it is not limited to somebody sending you a job application using ChatGPT. So, even I think that's also not very ethical use of AI. So I'll go to Anuja. So if you could share some examples of how, AI applications have significantly, improved the efficiency of your industry, for instance.
Sure, I think I'll start with an introduction. So Anuja, this side from Dubverse. We basically are a deep tech AI company from India, primarily building on the voices for India, which is across languages. And I think one thing I want to start with primarily is from an application standpoint of AI, primarily what's happening is on the English side, right? That's where the primary dominance of everything is, because that's where the data exists. But where we really see an opportunity for India is primarily from a local language standpoint. So we've been building a lot of foundational models from a voice standpoint. Now talking about application, I think the first one has been the content economy in a certain way that's taken over, where a lot of this content that we see is generated with AI. But I think there as well, that human in the loop, of course, is required, and that's where still technology is learning how to behave like a human and learn from a human. And I think it will keep getting better and better with time, primarily. The other industry, of course, that we see is above content is news, where again we've seen, I think, Sana, that is powered by AI completely, and a lot of content is curated with AI from that standpoint. What we also enable is a lot of training content, where again training usually was happening only in 1 or 2 languages, but with our technology it is being sort of translated to multiple languages and being done in local language as well. So I think this really allows us what was not possible earlier to be able to do now from a language standpoint, industry standpoint, and go deeper on those use cases, so that more and more people can be onboarded from an industry standpoint.
So I'll come to Nikhil. So how should India approach the AI regulation question, right? We have had, I think, multiple discussions over the years on how should India approach some regulation or the other. But how do you regulate AI?
Nandu, I think it's like asking how do you regulate the internet? Yeah. Because it's so broad, right? So in fact, I was just writing down, how would you, first let's classify AI, right? So there are recommendation engines that let's say recommend products for you or recommend certain content for you on social media as an example. So that's also AI. You have generative AI, for which you have audio, video, and text that is created. You have agentic frameworks or AI agents that perform certain actions for you. So there are, if you think about it, what do you regulate for then? Do you regulate for liability? Let's say it does something wrong. Like one example that I was discussing with Dhruv, in fact, was this idea that, it happened on a TV show once, on a news show, that they were doing a news show about a child who asked Alexa to order a dollhouse. And on the show, the person said, Alexa, order a dollhouse, is what the child said. And 10,000 homes, which had Alexa and were people watching those shows, that ended up ordering an Alexa, ended up ordering a dollhouse, right? So how do you attribute who's responsible for that order which got placed because someone said something on a TV show, right? So there are a number of complexities in terms of attributing liability or responsibility for actions. Then also, who do you regulate? Do you regulate the developer? Do you regulate the entity that's deploying the AI? Or do you regulate the user who's performed certain actions? So like I said, it's a really broad question in terms of how do you regulate AI? And it's not then, do you regulate AI separately when it comes to sensitive use cases like healthcare? And do you treat it the same as, let's say, generating content? So this has to be a more nuanced conversation, because at one level we have to regulate for harms, but AI is also immensely useful to us. We also have to regulate in order to enable people to develop more tech, to create more use cases, to deploy some of those use cases. So we need to protect, but we also need to enable at the same time. These are very, very complex discussions. We have to go like 3 levels deep, have sufficient conversations around it, look at global precedents, but also do our own first principles thinking, because India has to take its own path when it comes to AI. I don't have an answer about how to regulate AI, and this is like a 2-day conference by itself in terms of how to regulate AI.
So, as a corollary to this, Dhruv, like it is this nuance, right? But do we even understand this entire AI spectrum? Because it's still new, it's still evolving. It's evolving at a faster pace than anything else in the technology world has maybe evolved before this, right? And it's evolving into different branches, different. And you can't have one size fits all kind of answer. So how do you look at this from a legal framework perspective, especially keeping the ethical part of it in mind?
Correct. So I'll pick up from where Nikhil left. So as you said, legally speaking, if we want to regulate AI, why do we regulate, correct? Are there harms that people or corporates or entities face? Are they because of AI? Can it be, attributed to action of an AI or recommendation of AI? Correct. And how do we make good that harm? Do we punish? Do we, give compensation, etc.? That's a bare, very simple idea of why you would bring law into, any industry. Then the question, slightly more nuanced question start coming in. Whose liability is it? Is it the one who created the data set? Is it the one who made that model? Is it the one who wrapped some other application on top of that model? Or is it the one who's deploying it? Or is it the one who's using it, correct? In, let's say, Nikhil's example, whether the one who was using that Alexa device is liable, or whether Amazon was liable, etc., correct? So there are multiple questions, why, what, and all of it is like, what rights do I have against that harm? And how will I get those harms corrected? But before we go into it, we have to understand that, and as Nikhil was saying, that there's so many use cases of AI, correct? Multiple domains. If you look at critical infrastructure, there'll be a different understanding. If you look at health tech, there's a very different segment there. The issue that I think currently is that most of our fancies are being caught only by 1 or 2 use cases, correct? What happens in terms of deep fake or on political content that comes on a generative AI, and that's all that is catching our fancy. And I think the issue is that we are talking about regulation only from that lens, and we are trying to catch everything under it. I think we are very far away from understanding what all domains it is impacting, in what sense it is impacting. Once we have that understanding and once the industry has matured a bit, I think that's a good way. Then we can say that all the stakeholders have understood it, and then we can start talking about regulation per se. But yes, before that, I think instead of taking a very horizontal approach, maybe a more vertical, nuanced approach as to liability and harms may be taken on a very specific sectoral basis.
So, Vivan, you also have a take on this, right? You don't want anybody to look at AI as one monolith.
Privilege of coming after everyone, so I can maybe try to summarize everything as I respond to you. I think firstly we have to decouple ethics from questions of liability. Yeah. Ethics, broadly speaking, since that's the topic, there's been a lot of discussion over the last 4-5 years, a lot of principles, charters, etc. coming from various organizations. India has one from NASSCOM most prominently, but there are several others. And they tend to circulate around 4 or 5 constructs. Beneficence, doing good as a welfare construct, non-malfeasance, autonomy, justice, and explicability. Broadly, I mean, this is how the literature summarizes the literature, in a sense. I think, so from that vantage point, then the question is, who is this ethical principle construct aimed at? And as Nikhil alluded and the previous speaker, I think Abhishek also mentioned there are different categories of AI. We have to be very clear, and Nikhil also said, we are getting slightly obsessed by a few categories, but there are various categories. So there's autonomous vehicles and generative AI, and there are many ways of categorizing and putting this into a taxonomy. Then the next question is, and the what is, of course, how do you maintain ethics? So the next question becomes, how do you do this? How do you translate from theory to practice ethical AI? And I think a lot of slip between the cup and the lip here, but, and this is not novel what we are discussing, because it's, the slips have also been discussed in theory quite a bit, but there are a few problems. So one is when you think of laws like data protection, for instance, there are principles even in those laws that can be construed to be ethical, like data minimization and purpose limitation. Now, how do you create accountability frameworks for engineers who are working on apps which are designed to maximize data collection and maximize purpose, because that's the way in which venture capital will come to them? So there is, translation from a legal principle to an engineering principle requires a certain transmission mechanism, of which there is a lot of literature too. So it's not like, and we can come to that perhaps in the second round in terms of solutions. Then people mentioned also a way to translate ethics into practice is look at harms, and work around think about a legal framework around harms that also is linked to what is unethical. And that's the direction in which the European Union has proceeded. They have a law that's harms-based, but I would argue that a harms-based law has a very central failing, which we ought to consider in India for a minute, which is that the harms-based law does not account for things like power imbalances between deployers and users. Now, if the deployer happens to be the state, which is deploying facial recognition technology, and even if it is a high-risk technology, the state will obviously be giving itself the license to operate that technology. Does the user or the affected party in this case have any rights in this instance? What is ethical in this construct where the AI has already been deployed in my built environment, lived world, whatever you want to call it? And I think that's, for me, if you look at the hierarchy of priorities, getting the ethics of AI right for state deployment is the first point of departure that we should be discussing in India if we are to prioritize rule-making, law-making, guidelines, ethics, etc.
So, if I can come back to you, this interesting point of power imbalance, there is something that I have been thinking. So, often we think about harm, but is there an undue advantage that also works out in a country like India, where a company that is deploying AI at scale has an undue advantage, and it's not maybe ethically right in a country like India?
So again, on the power principle, there are two ways to look at freedom, right, from power in a sense. So there's the John Stuart Mill notion that I have the right to non-interference, that you should not, you should be able to wave your arm around, while you're standing around me. As long as you don't hit me, I'm okay. And that's the liberal principle on the basis of which a lot of our ethics is created, even today, right, in relation to AI. But if you think about the power imbalance question, it's more of a positive freedom. Yeah. It is, do I have the right to opt out of being around you, for instance? And in the case of, like I said, my existence within a built environment where I'm walking into an airport or I'm in any other facility where I don't have the option but to use that essential infrastructure, that imbalance and the ethics around it is a very critical question to address first. And corollary to that is, even though we keep talking about platforms as if they're essential infrastructure, they're not. I can turn off, I don't need to use Google search since they are the sponsor here, or is there any other? Adobe for opening a PDF. I don't need to. Or whatever else they're doing now with AI, sorry to limit them to the PDF world. So if I can opt out, I think I take care of my positive freedom, and I'm much less worried personally about my digital freedom on the app world than most lawmakers are, and I'm much more worried about my digital freedom in my essential infrastructure environment than lawmakers are.
Yeah, Nikhil, you wanted to come on.
So let's talk about, I just want to add to what Vivan said, because he's raised a really important point. For about, I think, the last 5 or 6 years, Telangana police has been stopping people, or Hyderabad police has been stopping people on the road at different points in time and putting a tablet to their face and doing facial recognition. That impinges on our freedom. That's using facial recognition to basically check about a person without what a person is doing, who they are, etc., without probable cause. That is a violation of privacy as well, but it happens unfettered, right? You also have a situation where Delhi police, for example, has been doing predictive policing, which is mapping certain areas, and they're judging people by where they come from in the city of Delhi that we are in. So where is the restriction on the state to start classifying us as particular types of individuals, either based on where we come from or just randomly stopping people on the road and doing facial scans? There is none. And that's one of our failures, one of the failures of our data protection law as well, where it gives publicly available personal data an exemption from restrictions under the Act. Which means that if anyone here, if your photo is up on social media, anyone can basically create a service where they're copying all of your photos from social media and can use that to profile you, can sell it to companies who are doing facial recognition without your consent. And so we're in a situation where under a law, our privacy has been taken away from us, especially for AI. And I think that's a law that needs to be amended from a privacy perspective. And I have more to talk about privacy and AI later, but I think our the situation with AI and with the data protection law is a disaster.
So Atul has just joined us, so I'll bring him into the conversation. Atul, have you seen or have you encountered specific challenges in your industry which are in the context of ethics and AI?
I think it's too early for me to comment on whether we have started facing challenges, but I can tell you one thing. No, basically, I'm a technocrat. One thing is AI is here to stay. Okay, we love it, we hate it, it's here to stay. That's one. Second is, no, of course, no, if you were to look at the issues, primary issues which are there, one is the data bias that is there, which is there. And that's largely because that's the way we have conditioned or built these systems, these algorithms. I give you an example. If you were to call Siri or any Alexa, you would generally find a female voice coming back. What do you need? So that's kind of you can understand where I'm coming from. So likewise, if you were to ask an AI tool to maybe create an image of a CEO, you would generally find a male, in a suited, booted, whatever. So these are biases which have been created. These are algorithms based on human biases. It has learned that, no, this is how it has to be. One is, as I said, the bias. Other is the privacy part, which the fellow panelist just mentioned. And third important thing, what I am clearly seeing is there's so much of frauds which are getting created. And that's something which I can't relate to immediately, but because it's a public forum, but cloning of behaviors, cloning of image, cloning of your voice, everything is happening using AI today, and that's creating massive havoc and frauds globally, not just in India. So that's a serious concern. And I can tell you, any technology you talk about, you would have good nation state actors using it for driving performance, driving positive growth. On the other hand, you would also have these fringe elements, those criminal mindsets, who would try to use it for nefarious reasons, for making, creating frauds of sorts. So that's something which is there. Now, even in cybersecurity, we all know, we use AI both for defending and attacking systems. Now, it's just a matter of like somebody may get breached and other systems are getting protected using AI. So it has both the worlds, and unfortunately, it's only, these issues will only grow broader. And as an organization, as enterprises, as governments, we need to strengthen. I can't also talk about policies today, because the rate of which the technology is evolving, what policies you would put. 6 months back, everybody was talking about generative AI. Today, everybody is talking about agentic AI, and agentic AI can create so much havoc. It can create a lot of opportunities, but it can create so much havoc in the sense that it is a combination of multiple LLM models working in tandem to make a task happen. And you can well imagine in what all areas it can be used, both for good and bad reasons. So as an enterprise, as I said, for us, what's important is how do we leverage it to the best purposes to drive. Suppose I talk about in manufacturing, where I come from, using it for predictive maintenance, using it for energy cost optimizations. And then, of course, we also use it, suppose, for attendance monitoring, or maybe automatic number plate recognitions, and then maybe identifying whether the vehicle database is updated in the Vahan app and all that. So those are positive use cases, but then we also, whilst we are developing such systems, we are trying to put some guardrails so that we do not get too invasive in an individual's privacy, while making sure the organization's objectives are met.
So if I can come to you, Anuja, again. So as the founder of a company in India, does all this chatter, all this conversation about regulation, is there a fear that this is going to stifle innovation? Like, people want to push the envelope on what can be done. Is there a fear that people will get a little bit, and especially since we don't have a lot of things written down, and we don't have a thou shall not kind of a list, when it comes to AI. So how do you look at it as the founder of a company working in this space?
Sure, I think this is both positive and negative, like you said, right? And that's exactly how it impacts us as well. But if I try and bring about a little more global perspective into all of this, right? In India, of course, we question policies, ethics a lot in sort of at the initial stages only. But if we look on the West, I think they are going left, right, center with everything that's possible. They're, of course, discussing policies. EU, of course, we've seen, so that's a different world altogether. But I think for them, sort of being ahead in technology is way above everything else in a certain way. But I think when we look at these two economies, obviously the way that we operate is very different. There it's more led by tech ecosystem, tech giants in a certain way, which are calling the shots. In India, we are still more state-led with the last few innovations that we've seen in fintech and other industries as well, have been more state-led. So I think that's yet to sort of for AI specifically come out of how India is going to operate. But I, as a founder for 3 years, how we've sort of tried to navigate a few things, I still think there's a larger role by state that will be played for us to do something with a larger outcome in a certain way. And that's where we are sometimes not competing with the West on very similar grounds. The basis, the fundamentals in a certain way change a lot, is what I would really want to put out. So that's how I would say it's impacting. And other point I really want to add from an ethics standpoint is the open source of AI in a certain way, right? So if a company is doing it, if an industry is sort of doing it, there is a name attached to it, and you can go back and question, have guardrails, have all of those things defined. But how AI technology is progressing, open source again is a double-edged in a certain way, where that's really required to come out so that more people can build on top of it. But if you sort of put it out there, the anonymity of the internet really takes over, which sort of really harms, mostly harms, and a very less good sort of comes out of it. So I think that's another point of discussion, I think, for all of us and for the state as well, to really identify how that is being looked at from a country standpoint.
Add on this point, just I'll take 30 seconds. No, there's another aspect of which we need to think about is, AI has this promise of replacing jobs.
Yeah.
Typically, organizations believe that if you deploy AI, you'll be able to let go of this much percentage. And that percentage is going higher every progressive month. So what's happening, if you clearly see there's a pattern, you would find in due course of time that organizations like, I can't name those big tech giants, you would find that there will be an unequal distribution of wealth happening, wherein these large giants with their software agents, tools, would now come to us and to organizations. They will say, we will charge you $20 or $30 per seat, per person. You pay us, and whilst you do so, you can let go of 30-40% of your people. So that's the promise. So this is a huge issue for a country like India, wherein we've got massive population. So what will happen is wealth gets accumulated to these large giants based out of the West. And here we've got people who have deprived and they have lost their jobs to automation. So we need to also work on these lenses, because it's not just about privacy. It's about your existence, your own job, which is at stake. And there is another country or state which is making sure that, they are doing it ethically, of course. But as a country, as a policy, we need to make sure that out of that pie which goes there, how much gets retained here so that we can upskill our team to be ready for the future.
So I wanted to ask Abhishek the same question that, but I'm reframing it a little bit. Is there a way to figure out, or is there a way to tackle this ethical question, especially in a country like India, on how AI is sort of diminishing the human role? But it doesn't always have to be diminishing the human role, right? It can maybe create new opportunities which maybe we don't know of right now, but that is how all new technologies have, I'm sure, about 30 years back, I come from Kerala, we have seen a lot of protests against computers. Right? So we have always had that pushback when new technology comes in, because we really don't know about the new opportunities that these are going to open. Are we in a phase like that right now?
So you took us 30 years back. I will take you, maybe 60 years back. So this concept of, ethics and then technology is not something new. This has happened in the medical science sphere as well. So way back in the 1970s, there was a lot of work going on biomedical science, and where the concept of how much is too much when you take people as the subject. And for about 4 years, the best of the minds of that time, they came together, and then a report was published which is known as the Belmont Report. So that's a report which in this conference which happened for about 4 days. So that conference hall was Belmont, so it was in Maryland in USA, and that's why it is called as Belmont Report. And so the idea was to give some guardrails on what is the right way of doing it. And if I summarize it, so the two salient point was, think of people, human, respect for the people. So whatever you're doing, whatever study, research you're doing, you need to keep in mind the central idea of the respect for the individual or the human being. And this is true even for the, the topic we are discussing today. The second thing which even Vivan discussed about was the beneficence. The concept of beneficence means thou shall not do any harm. Yeah. So the concept is that whatever you are planning should be in a positive and ethical way. So if you are planning to do facial recognition, to do certain crime detection, So that should be a opportunity where you are not thinking of anything wrong. And then, of course, have rules and regulations. So the same report is now being used by any researcher. The concept remains the same, because at the center is the human being. And so the basic concepts remain the same, and that is to be used and can be used even in the Indian context. Of course, some country-specific customizations are required, which I'm sure would be done. We are talking about Data Protection Act. So that is one area in that direction. And as this technology will evolve, I think today, probably I have a different view that today we as a country have to exploit more of the technology and not restrict ourselves because we think that this will do us harm. And as we evolve as a community, maybe as industry or the use case, the voices will come together, and the society will form the rules and the regulation which are required to make ethical use of the AI.
So, if I can come to Dhruv. Dhruv, so I guess all of us can agree that maybe the government is not the best custodian of something like this. So how do we go about this? Is there something similar to a directive principles kind of a thing that, it is almost self-regulatory, that people stay within this, and you have a lot of companies talking about responsible AI and all, but do you think that's a frontier we can explore, or there has to be something, in the middle where, we have this charter on ethical AI. How do you get companies to follow it, or at least stay within certain guardrails?
So again, I mean, there are different ways to do it, correct? You can have like a very horizontal law like what EU is. You can have a very, vertical laws depending on sectors that I was talking about. Or you can go a very self-regulatory way with a, a charter ethics, correct? I definitely think yes, on a corporate level, on a company side level, we definitely can look at implementing these ethics through a charter or self-regulation as a first step. Definitely that's going to happen. But I think at some time, in near future or maybe distant future, depending on how fast it's moving, we will need sectoral insertions of maybe some amendment to current laws. And I think that should be the starting point. What we should definitely be very wary of is trying to do a very expansive horizontal law before understanding what's happening to this nascent industry. And when I say nascent, I don't say in the economic terms, I say in terms of understanding between us. Also, I think one thing we need to understand is, and I think this has already been spoken about, is that while thinking about ethics of AI, while thinking about what is the best way to do it, we also need to figure, and when we talk about, we usually end up looking at harms or risks or, the negative side of it. We also need to understand for a country like India, we definitely need to leverage it and leverage it now. Correct? There will be very structural changes or likely structural changes in the Indian economy that we need to leverage it and try to get ahead of it, and we need to ensure that the regulatory shackles do not sort of arrest that development. As to, and sir had already talked about, that there will be obviously disruption in job markets, etc. But there will be other avenues that are opening up. For example, I'll give you very quickly, and I think Nikhil wanted to say quickly that, while there might be some changes in the job market, but what will happen is you'll see new jobs coming up. For example, AI drones, correct? There's AI already being used in drones. We are seeing women in agricultural, small tier 3, tier 2 towns. We are looking at villages, etc., where women are able to use drones for agricultural purposes, for pesticide spraying, etc. And this is possible because the delta of that skill has been reduced because of that use of AI. I was talking to some agri-tech AI company which said that we thought that we are only going to supply to the smaller farmers, but now the bigger entities, most of our money is coming from them by giving them agri-tech insights through AI, and we are able to subsidize the cost for the smaller farmers, right? And their efficiency and the efficiency of their labor is increasing. So that structural change, there are a lot of positives that we need to sort of look at it before all saying that, there will always, all these harms will be there, either on the economic side or on the, right side of the rights and damages towards the individuals.
Yeah, Nikhil, you had a point to make.
Very quick point. We've been talking about ethics in deployment and usage. But let's also talk about the ethics of creation.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the AI that we have today is built on scraping vast amounts of data, vast amount of information, vast amount of copyrighted information from authors, publishers, news publications, YouTube videos, etc.
Without any consent.
Not just without taking consent, but without paying for what is effectively copyright violation. There are court cases regarding this, but also scraping a vast amount of public data from the internet. So there are real challenges with the ethics with which many of these tools have been built, many of these models have been built. And the question is, who accounts for that? Look, technology often operates in gray areas, and it gets built in gray areas. Like, for example, if you look at mobile wallets, right? One of the first few wallets in this country was Mobile 360 from the Times of India group. The RBI banned it within a couple of days, back in 2005. So, and it wasn't regulated at that point in time. Then the payments wallet regulation came in 2009 or 10 or somewhere around that time, right? So technology gets built in when there is a regulatory gray area. Now the point is, how do we apportion for the violation of copyright, for the violation of privacy that has happened in the past? Can you actually delete that information once you've trained the model? I don't think that's technically feasible. So we have a problem to deal with in society with the AI that's already there. And how we solve it is, I don't know how we're going to solve that problem.
So, and it could well be the last question because we are almost running out of time. So I'll come to Vivan. Vivan, taking off from what Nikhil is saying, is there a business opportunity in creating a product which is like, you see organic food, you see sustainable technology. Is there a way to say, you create an AI product which is been ethical from the start, from the data, from the training model itself and in everything it does? Is there a business opportunity like that? Or is it always going to have a shade of gray?
It's too expensive to be ethical in AI is what I can tell you, but I'll leave it to Vivan.
No, I agree with Nikhil. I mean, look at various examples in the digital space, private browsers, all sorts of secure and private by design devices. They tend to be more expensive than, other devices or products that may be mass market. So embedding ethics in a product comes at a cost. Yes, we have to be willing to pay that cost. We've had a free ride on the internet for a while now. The state has to be willing to pay that cost more than anyone else. They have earned revenues from digitization for the last 10 or 15 years, almost in a windfall way. And some of the ways in which we as society can recover those revenues that the state has earned, one of the most important, and it is also perhaps a business opportunity, is through education. And embedded ethics is very much an answer to how to go about looking at proliferation of ethical AI. Embedded ethics is a construct which links to engineering education particularly. And I mean, look at the state of our engineering schools. They're far from looking at multidisciplinary inputs which can help engineers understand the implications of what they're building. But that's where we need to get to. So when we talk about multidisciplinary modes of education in the new education policy, we have a framework to think about some of this responsible design construct percolating into education. And the other business opportunity, of course, because a lot of us are in the services space, links to the kinds of standards, accreditation bodies, and this sort of cycle that needs to, again, proliferate in India. So for instance, and this stems from a strand called aligned approaches to ethics. So there is, for instance, the IEEE, which is a global internet body in a sense. It has something called the Global Initiative of Ethics of Autonomous Systems for Ethically Aligned Design, a mouthful. But that's a standard for autonomous systems built in 2019, implementable, not vague, doesn't have notions that are very hard to translate for engineers and so on and so forth. And finally, I mean, the hallowed, value-sensitive design construct, which is literally like you have to embed those values not just in your education system, but again, a business opportunity perhaps for some, but to embed it within corporates. So to what the gentleman said also about how we think about the future of jobs, it's not just a question of, some sort of a digital imperialism eating up our jobs. How are we, within each of our organizations, empowering individuals to respond to AI? Are our tech companies doing enough so that our people can survive the churn? And I would say no is an intuitive answer, and there lies a big ethical question that we need to resolve over the next decade.
Okay, so we have, yeah, sure.
Topic, no? No, for every product which you mentioned, which is licensed on AI, not any offering, you would find at least 2 to 3 open source products available, which means that even if you put guardrails around products, suppose OpenAI comes up with, say, Project Strawberry they are talking about, which is the next version of 4.0. Beyond 4.0, they have come up with some Project Strawberry, which is, you can call it ChatGPT version 5. But you would have the llamas of the world, llama 3s and more of the world. So there is so much which can be done using open source, even if you, so I think it's, as machines are getting more intelligent and trying to become, gain that AGI stage, artificial general intelligence, I think it's for us as humans to basically drive morality and then only we make sure that the ethics rule higher than just the tech.
So, you want to make a point? I think it's only right that you make the last point. Yes, please.
So only rightly mentioned, right, that AI is only learning from what humans have done.
Yes.
So the ethics, I think, also sort of will be carried on with the same sort of ecosystem in a certain way. So I think we, as whatever we do from our day-to-day, as an industry, as an individual, I think it's all of that is mirrored in a certain way that it's showing us. So, yeah.
So it's, at the end of the day, only as good as the humans behind it, or as ethical as the humans behind it. So on that note, I think, I think we'll end this panel. I hope all of you have some interesting takeaways and will become a little bit more ethical in your approach to AI. Thank you.